We are also following more breaking news right now. We've just understood that President-elect Trump has announced a new defense secretary as well. He's a Fox News host and a military veteran with 2 Bronze Stars, Pete Hegseth. We're going to have much more on that in a few minutes. But first, we want to go to that other breaking news. John Ratcliffe, his new director of the CIA. Ratcliffe served in the first Trump administration as director of national intelligence. He also represented Texas's 4th congressional district in the House for several years and worked as a federal prosecutor in the Lone Star State. For more on this appointment, I want to get right to NBC News Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Dilanian. Ken, what more can you tell us about Ratcliffe?
Tom, John Ratcliffe is a politician. He's not a foreign policy expert, and he's a very partisan political figure who, when he was director of national intelligence for about 8 months at the end of the Trump administration, showed a willingness to shade intelligence, to use intelligence in a way that he knew benefited from Donald Trump. At the same time, he's viewed in foreign policy circles as a grown-up, as somebody who has some grounding, having held the job of director of national intelligence, and as somebody who was not willing to go along with Donald Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election. But I'll go back to the partisan stuff. One example that stands out during his tenure is that he declassified some intelligence that the U.S. intelligence community had obtained from Russia that purported to show that Russia had concluded that Hillary Clinton was trying to concoct a story of Donald Trump's connections to Russia in order to damage Donald Trump. That was disinformation. And even at the time he released it, he said that they weren't sure whether this was true or whether this was Russian mischief. A lot of Democrats saw that as kind of a dirty trick, a way to use intelligence to benefit Donald Trump. So that's what Democrats would say are the negatives about him. On the positive side, though, testimony from the January 6th committee showed that he was not willing to go along with Donald Trump's efforts to overturn the election. He advised against White House officials participating in that. He said it would be bad for Donald Trump's legacy, and he did not come up in any of the criminal investigations of what happened during that period.
Ken, you've done a lot of reporting on the CIA. What do you think? How do you think he'll be received by the agents there?
Warily, cautiously. But the thing about the CIA is there are very few political appointees, really just the director and the general counsel. Everybody else there are career people, and they have long memories, and they know how to handle, and they know how to win over directors. And so I think they're going to make an effort to wrap their arms around him and try to take him into their confidence. He's going to have access to the most esoteric secrets in the government. And look, big picture here, as we're seeing with Marco Rubio and Mike Waltz, the National Security Advisor, a combat veteran, some Democrats are pleasantly surprised with the caliber of people. They're not people they're going to ever agree with on a partisan basis, but these are people with records in the foreign policy area, people who understand the world, and who are not necessarily on board with shrinking and this America First idea that the United States should not project power around the world, which is a bit of a surprise so far, Tom.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.